So in the same week, I have incredible good news for the LGBT community, LGBTQ. I don't even know all the, I don't even know the full outline anymore. LGBTQIA, is it? Plus? So forgive me for being, stuck in like 2010 in terms of my terminology here. But there's good news and there's bad news on this front. First, I want to give you the bad news. Then we'll get to the amazing news, which actually just came out about 20 minutes ago. But the bad news is as follows. The Trump administration rolls back healthcare protections for transgender people. They say sex is to be determined by biology. So let me give you a quote from what Health and Human Services says. Under the final rule, Health and Human Services eliminates certain provisions of the 2016 rule that exceeded the scope of the authority delegated by Congress in Section 1557 of Obamacare. HHS will enforce Section 1557 by referring to the government's interpretation of sex discrimination according to the plain meaning of the word sex, as male or female, and as determined by biology. The 2016 rule declined to recognize sexual orientation as a protected category under the ACA, and HHS will leave that judgment undisturbed. So, basically what that means is the Trump administration is saying, if you want to discriminate against transgender people, and you're a healthcare company, that's perfectly legal because protections when it comes to sex are solely for gender, are solely for male, female. That doesn't translate into sexual orientation. And, this is what they call textualism, which is like the plain face reading of what it says, interpret it in a literal way. And really, it's, barely coded bigotry from the right to try to limit the scope of non-discrimination protections and to basically leave out transgender people. So the Trump administration just did this week or last week. And it's a giant middle finger to the transgender community. But right before I came on air, we got this amazing news. I'm very happy to share this with everybody. This is a historic day in many respects. The Supreme Court delivered a historic victory for LGBTQ workers, ruling that the federal law that bars sex discrimination in employment does apply to LGBTQ employees. So there was a case. There's this woman by the name Amy Stevens. She was fired from her job because she came out as transgender. So she came out and said, I'm trans, and then apparently her boss or bosses said, okay, we're uncomfortable with that. So they literally fired her over the fact that she's trans because they were uncomfortable with it. And so she sued as a result of it. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and we just learned that now it is illegal and it is unconstitutional to fire somebody on the basis of their sexual orientation and their gender identity. The argument that the federal government was making is, no, those protections only mean for, male, female. So in other words, you can't fire on the basis of gender, but it means biological gender. And the response from Amy Stevens and from her legal team was, no. Also gender identity. Also transgender people also have those same protections under the law. And of course, they're referring to the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the non-discrimination protections that are in that law. And the argument is a plain-face reading of that law says basically you cannot discriminate against somebody because of arbitrary characteristics that they can't control. And so when it says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, they say, no, that also means, gender identity. And so that also would protect transgender people. So the decision is 6-3. Neil Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion, which is absolutely surprising. He was joined by Roberts, another conservative one. And then, of course, Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan also sided with the majority here. So the only three dissenters, it was Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Brett Kavanaugh. So, listen, you got to say massive credit to Neil Gorsuch and massive credit to John Roberts because, if you were guessing going into it, I certainly would have said at least one of those two, probably both of them, were going to be on the other side of it. So really, it was the fact that you had some crossover votes from conservative justices here that we ended up upholding LGBTQ rights. So really, this is a historic day. Just so everybody understands, I believe it's about 20 states, maybe 23 states thereabouts, that do not protect transgender people, and it is totally legal to fire somebody because they're transgender. That's in over 20 states that was the case. Well, now, as a result of the Supreme Court decision, it is illegal in every single state in the United States of America to fire somebody solely because they're transgender. So listen, this is a wonderful day for justice, a wonderful day for liberty and freedom, and it's something to be celebrated. This reminds me a lot of the day that the Supreme Court basically ruled that gay marriage is legal. That's how big of a deal this is, and it's very rare that we get good news in 2020, so I'll definitely take it. However, I will say you got to keep your eye on the Supreme Court, because here's what happens with the Supreme Court as a general rule. They'll give all the ground you want on social issues, but they will never give an inch. They'll never give a millimeter when it comes to corporate issues, and they'll always side with big money interests on that front. But at least on this front, man, this is a total victory. I'll definitely take it. It's a huge W, and really it's a day to be celebrated. And again, all I have to say is massive credit to Gorsuch and Roberts, who it really was unexpected that they flipped to the proper side of this, but they did. And apparently they're not okay with firing somebody because of arbitrary characteristics that they can't control. So this actually was a big hit to Donald Trump, who really tried to pick far right-wing justices because he was trying to deliver for his evangelical fundamentalist base and, basically screw over LGBTQ people in order to shore up his own base. Well, it turns out that the justices he picked, or at least, Gorsuch, but not Kavanaugh, but he picked Gorsuch, and Gorsuch was on the left-wing side of this issue. So again, couldn't be happier at the result of this, and I'm not sure, it might be the case that this kind of makes null and void what Trump just did with getting rid of the non-discrimination protections in healthcare. This might overturn that as well. So either way, we'll take it. It's a huge W, and that, again, is super rare in the year 2020.